Hello everyone, my name is Sven Bernhard. I'm a Kong champion working for Opitz Consulting, a German consultancy company and Kong partner. Today I wanted to show you how to integrate Kubernetes services with an API gateway and the benefits of doing so. In this tutorial I will show you how easy and straightforward it is to get started with Kong Konnect, Kong Ingress Controller, to manage your Kubernetes services as APIs. And as seeing is believing, I would propose to directly jump into the demo. So let's get started. Before we jump into Konnect and the Kong Ingress Controller, we will briefly look at the demo environment I set up front. So what we have here is an application called Customer Service, which is a REST API that gives us information about customers. This customer API is currently just available from within the Kubernetes cluster, so it has a Kubernetes service of type cluster IP. And currently we are not able to access this service from the outside world. For demo purposes, we can do a port forward to this application so that it is accessible from our local host on port 8088. I will show you in a second. So call to 8088 on the endpoint customer, and we will be provided with all the information the customer service has about the customers. So the list basically of all customers. But for production usages, we need an endpoint that provides us more control. And for that, we usually use in a Kubernetes environment the ingress object. For managing the ingress object, we need a special controller called an ingress controller, and Kong provides a ingress controller implementation. And we can manage this ingress controller or multiple ingress controller instances in multiple Kubernetes clusters using Kong Konnect. So let's jump into Kong Konnect, which is the global management interface for all Kong service or for all Kong clusters we have in our IT system landscape. And we can have multiple Kong clusters. So we can decide to either have a cluster per environment, or we can decide to have a cluster per line of business, etc. And to separate those clusters, we have the opportunity to create so-called control planes. One control plane is capable to manage multiple so-called data planes, so the API gateways where we can send the API requests and which does all the routing stuff in the sense of an API gateway. So API gateway is a pattern that is receiving external requests and routes them to the respective backend APIs, and exactly this is what the gateway is doing in that case. And in addition, a gateway is capable of implementing cross-cutting concerns like security, traffic control, or even observability. So let's create a control plane, because we wanted to create a Kubernetes-based control plane. We need to choose the Kong Ingress Controller option here. We will fill in the name, some description here, So we will, so we are good to go with this information. We also can add labels to being able to filter different control planes. This makes sense if we have a bunch of control planes we wanted to manage independently, to filter those control planes and monitor them individually. And then we're gonna to hit this generating script button. And this generating script button provides us all information that are needed to install an instance of Kong Ingress Controller to a specific Kubernetes cluster. So we need to create a namespace, we need to add Helm repo, we need to update the Helm repo, we need certificates which allows us to securely communicate between the Kong Ingress Controller and the Kong control plane, which is hosted in the cloud. And for that, we need to copy over the information about the certificate, which I will do in the background. So TLS key, TLS certificate. And in addition, what we need is a values YAML, as the Kong Ingress Controller is installed using a Helm chart. So we need to copy those information over also to our localhost. And from here, from this perspective, that's it. So we need to, in the following, need to execute the sequence of all those commands. And after we executed all those commands, Kong Ingress Controller is set up and automatically connects to our control plane we just created here. So, switching back to our terminal window, I will show you what I've done in the background. So I've created a TLS cert, I've created a TLS key and a values YAML, and I created a setup bash script. So what does this guy do? It creates a namespace, it adds the repo, it updates the Helm repo, it creates a Kubernetes secret, and it installs the Ingress controller using Helm. And it applies some special things with respect to Gateway API, but we will come to this at a later point. First of all, when we will execute the setup bash script to install Kong Ingress Controller to our Kubernetes cluster. So as we can see, namespace has been created. We updating and adding the repo. We creating the Gateway API components. We created the secret, and finally we deployed Kong Ingress Controller. So now we're gonna check out the components that have been created. We have a pod for a controller and a gateway pod. So the gateway pod is basically the proxy that is exposed to the external world, where we send the requests against. And we have the controller instance, which is basically the Ingress Controller implementation that is watching the Kubernetes environment, respectively etcd, about new ingress resources that are created and that are marked with the respective ingress class, which is Kong, because in our cluster we may have different ingress controllers, and to differentiate which ingress controller is responsible for what ingress definitions, we need to specify the ingress class. So what we can see is that we have the Kong gateway proxy of type load balancer. This allows us to access this gateway from the external world. The load balancer is is automatically instantiated by our cloud provider, which may take a few seconds. And there we go. So the load balancer in the cloud environment has been provisioned. This is the public IP of the load balancer. So we can basically access this public IP. And what we can see is that we are up and running with our Ingress controller, right? So the gateway proxy returns us no root matched with those values. This is because we haven't configured an API right now. In the following, what we will do is we now going to configure a ingress definition that makes our customer service available externally. For doing so, we are using a definition, an ingress definition, like that. So we wanted to expose the customer service using this path. So customer-API/v1. We wanted to route all requests that come in on that are incoming on this path to the backend service customer service on port HTTP. So our port on our service deployment has a name HTTP, and I can quickly show it to you. Wanted to show you the service. Here in the service definition we have this port HTTP, which is listening on port 80. Back to the ingress definition. We also see the ingress class name, which is important, that it is named Kong or anything else. Also, if you have multiple ingress controllers or even Kong Ingress controllers deployed to your cluster, you need to define and specify different ingress class names. Kong, for the Kong Ingress controller, Kong is the default. And now we're gonna to apply this definition to our Kubernetes cluster. So now we're gonna watch it or check it if it's been applied correctly. Yes, and what we can see is our customer service now has an ingress definition and also has a public IP, and this IP is exactly the same IP we had here. So this is the IP of our gateway proxy, right? And now I can, using the path we defined, and we will remember the resource name we used in the test was the port forward, which was customers. And now we can call the API, and we can also see that the API call went through the proxy, the Kong proxy, because the Kong proxy also adds some headers, some additional information. So basically what we did, we proxied the external request to the customer service through the Ingress controller. The Ingress controller forwards this, respectively the Kong gateway proxy forwards this request to the customer service backend, which is a pod that runs within our Kubernetes cluster. So And this is simply by applying this ingress rule here. But let's see what happens in the background, the magic behind it. The magic that Kong Konnect does, or the ingress controller. So we just use this ingress definition. Here we can see our data plane, which is fully operational, which Kong Ingress Controller version we have. So here you get all the information, also analytics about how many requests have been sent, how high was the error rate, and information about the latency. And what we can see, we sent 2 requests and we have an error rate of 50%. This is fine because our first call that we did was before we defined the service configuration. So we just hit the proxy to see if the Kong Ingress Controller is working correctly, and this is why we have an error rate of 50%. So you can also see the data plane nodes. So we have one Kong data plane, Kong gateway version 3.5.03. It is connected, and it is 9 minutes ago for the first site. So then we can see the gateway services. So obviously by applying the ingress configuration to our Kubernetes cluster, from that the ingress controller created a configuration for the service, in this case the customer service, and a route. And the service is the representation of the backend service, and the route is the representation on the gateway proxy, right? We can also see the paths we configured, and this also gives us information about how we can access a specific API. It's always a route where we send the information in, and internally Kong forwards it to the respective service, the gateway service. So we have a first API in place, but the API is open for everyone who knows the proxy IP, and for everyone who knows about the path information. So we wanted to secure the API, and for doing so we can apply Kong plugins. And for this tutorial, I will use key authentication plugin and rate limiting plugin. So rate limiting plugin is a traffic control plugin that helps us to control the maximum amount of API calls that are allowed within a defined time frame. So what we can see here is that we are allowed to send 5 requests per minute, and we limit this by API consumer. We will see that in a few seconds what this means, consumer. You can also limit it by IP. You can also limit it by different other aspects, also by user and all that kind of stuff. And we have a key authentication plugin which requires us to add an API key to each API requests. Without an API key, we are not allowed to access the API. So what we additionally need, especially with respect to the key auth plugin, is a so-called consumer. And the consumer is a representation in Kong of a user, if you will so. And also for that, we have a consumer definition. So a Kong consumer, which is a custom resource definition. The name of the consumer is Sven. Here we also have the ingress class, that the ingress controller knows that it is responsible for handling that specific resource. And a consumer also needs credentials. In this case, we have a key auth credential, which we put in a regular Kubernetes secret, right? And the key is secret. So this is the combination. Our API key is secret. We assign this secret to a consumer, and the consumer is a representation of a user that wanted to use this specific API. And based on this user information, the rate limiting plugin jumps in and makes sure that the user Sven is not allowed to make more than 5 requests in 1 minute. Okay, so let's apply the plugins. And also let's apply the consumers. So all the magic happens in the back. Now we will want to call the API. It's still working. And this is because we haven't assigned the plugins to a specific API. And in Kong, we can assign the plugins on a global level. But for that, we have to use a Kong global plugin resource. And what we used here was just a Kong plugin, not a Kong cluster plugin. And to assign the plugins to a service or route, we need either to annotate the service definition, Kubernetes service definition, or we need to annotate the ingress definition. When we annotate the ingress definition, it will be applied to the route. Otherwise, it will be applied to the service. We will apply and annotate the respective service. So we have the customer service, where we add the konghq.com/plugins annotation, and there we add the name of the plugins. And the name of the plugins we defined when defining the Kong plugin. We have a rate limit, and we have a key auth tutorial for the key authentication plugin. We will do it. So now the plugins are configured to this Kong service. And if we try to call the API now, we are not allowed to do so because no API key found in requests. So we need to define the API key, and then we are allowed to access the service. And what we can see as we configured the rate limiting plugin, we can see that we have the rate limit information in the header. So the rate limit per minute are 5. We have 4 remaining calls within this 1 minute. We can also see the rate limit reset time, so it will be resetted in 12 seconds. And if we now just print out the headers and do several calls, then we will also see that at some point we will hit the rate limit. And now we hit the rate limit, we get a 429 too many requests. So we have to wait until the rate limit has been reset, and then we are allowed to call it again. Oh, we have 1 minute left. Now 60 seconds are over. Now we are able to access the API again. We get a 200 OK. The thing with consumers is if we now create another consumer, then we have the rate limit individually per consumer. So if this user Sven is not allowed to access the API anymore because he exceeded the rate limit, the other user still is allowed to do so. So what happened in Konnect is that we created a consumer, so Sven, and we can also see that this consumer did some requests to the API. We can see we have 7 requests with 200 and 2 requests with 429, right? Also from plugins perspective, we can see the plugins we just configured. So the key and the authentication and the rate limiting plugin, we can see all the configuration details we set on the plugin level, and so we are completely fine and have the transparency, what APIs we have, what kind of consumers, which plugins we use, and how does the configuration look like. With Konnect, in the case of the Kong Ingress Controller, all those information are read-only, as we can see here. So we are not able to change the configuration here in the Konnect management interface. We are required to use the Kubernetes manifests, and this is great because with that we can leverage the power of concepts like GitOps to consistently manage our configurations in the Git repository, just do changes in the Git repository without the fear that anyone is able to change our configuration in the management interface, right? So with respect to the time, I quickly wanted to show another possibility to expose services externally. We talked about Ingress. Ingress is a very simple construct available in Kubernetes since I think Kubernetes 1.19, and it has a strong focus on HTTP traffic from the outside world, so layer 7 traffic. But nowadays we don't just have HTTP traffic that we wanted to get into our Kubernetes environments. We also had other traffic like TCP, UDP, so also layer 4 traffic. And for that purpose, we can use the Kubernetes Gateway API, which has been G8 in the last quarter of last year. And as we've seen when we set up the Kong Ingress Controller, we also added the custom resource definitions for the Gateway API. So Kong Ingress Controller is capable to support both the Kong Ingress and the Ingress definition and the Gateway API definitions. And in using the Gateway API definitions, we can define a HTTP route, for example. So what we will do is we delete the ingress we defined so the API is no longer responding, and we will apply a HTTP route. It looks quite similar to the ingress because we also define a path, we also define the backend, but an HTTP route is more powerful. As I mentioned, it supports, besides layer 7, supports layer 4 traffic, and I'm able to also define traffic routing rules and further things also. So now we apply this thing again, so HTTP route. So it seems that it has been created. now we should be able to access our API again, and that's it. So isn't that cool? Going back to the Connect interface, we can also see that we still have our gateway services. Yes, it has a slightly different name than before with the Ingress way, but the functionality is the same. So I'm able to access my service from externally. And that's a great thing. And this shows also the power of Kong Ingress Controller, allowing us to use both the Ingress way and the Gateway API way. So if you already started with Kubernetes and started with Kubernetes Ingress, and if you plan to move over to Kong Ingress Controller, you can still go with your Ingress definition and maybe use Gateway API for new API services you wanted to expose. And this is a great thing from my perspective. With that, I'm done with my demo. One last thing, maybe. From analytics perspective, so we've seen some analytics information in our control plane view, but we also have analytics information available globally over all control planes. So we can see the traffic information. So we can see we have 5 failed requests and 12 successful requests. We can also see what kind of errors did we have. We have 400 errors mainly. So from the client side, so maybe we have to look into our API definitions. We didn't have any 500ers. So and we can also analyze the latency, which is very important in many use cases to keep an eye on the latency, especially if we have respective performance requirements. Yeah. So that's basically it. A quick summary of what we've seen in this tutorial. We have seen how to install Kong Ingress Controller and how to manage it from a Connect perspective. We have seen how we can configure routes, services using a Kong Ingress definition and also using an HTTP route from the API gateway specification. We have seen how we can easily secure and manage our services using plugin and consumers. And last but not least, we had a quick look on the monitoring capabilities of Connect. So I hope you really enjoyed this tutorial and it was useful for you. And yeah, thanks for watching and keep on Konging. Bye.